Today, hundreds of fast food workers plan to converge on the corporate offices of Labor Secretary nominee Andrew Puzder and demand the fast food mogul withdraw his nomination. Puzder is head of the company that franchises the fast food outlets Hardee's and Carl's Jr. He's a longtime Republican donor who's been a vocal critic of raising the minimum wage, of the Fight for 15 movement, of expansion of overtime pay, and of paid sick leave and the Affordable Care Act. Puzder's Senate confirmation hearing is scheduled for Thursday. The hearing has been postponed 4 times previously. Last week, Puzder became the second of Trump's cabinet nominees to acknowledge hiring an undocumented worker. The first was Commerce Secretary nominee and billionaire Wilbur Ross. Similar practices have led to the rejection of past cabinet nominees, including 2 of President Clinton's nominees for Attorney General in 1993.
The Riverfront Times in St. Louis also reports that Andrew Puzder was accused of abusing his former wife multiple times. Puzder's ex-wife even went on Oprah decades ago in disguise to speak about the domestic violence. Meanwhile, a recent survey by Restaurant Opportunity Center United has found a shocking 2/3 of women working at Puzder's restaurants experience sexual harassment at work. 1/3 of Puzder workers said they've had some of their wages stolen or not received required breaks. The report also called into question the food safety standards at Puzder's restaurants, with nearly 80% of Puzder workers saying they'd prepared or served food while they were sick. Well, for more, we go now to Washington, D.C., where we're joined by Saru Jayaraman, who is co-founder and co-director of the Restaurant Opportunity Centers United, known as ROC United. Their new report is titled Secretary of Labor Violations, the Low-Road Business Model of CKE Restaurant Inc.'s Andrew Puzder. And in Los Angeles, we're joined by Maggie Guerrero, who worked as a shift leader at a Carl's Jr. for 2 years. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Saru, I believe that the date has now been set for Thursday for Puzder's confirmation hearing. It put off 5 times. It is quite astounding. Can you talk about your concerns about the head of Carl's and Hardee's becoming the Secretary of Labor under Donald Trump?
Absolutely. First, it has to be understood that as the leader of CKE restaurant chains, Andy Puzder is not just a CEO of a fast food company. He's also a leader in the National Restaurant Association, a trade lobby that has essentially lobbied for almost a century to keep wages as low as inhumanely possible, including keeping wages for fast food workers at $7.25 and tipped workers at $2.13 an hour. Today's actually our annual day of action, 213, to highlight the fact that the wage has been stuck at $2.13 an hour for a quarter century. And it's that kind of policy that the National Restaurant Association and Andy Puzder have been lobbying for successfully for the last many, many decades. Now, in his own restaurants, Andy Puzder not only, has said, I wish I could replace these workers with robots. I don't actually believe in the minimum wage at all, but has been found in very serious violation, not only by our report, which was pretty overwhelming, but also by the very department that he is now charged to run. The Department of Labor has found that more than half of his restaurants were in violation of basic wage and hour laws, like not paying overtime, not providing breaks, workers working off the clock, and worst of all, as you mentioned, just incredible amounts of sexual harassment.
Well, Saru, on this issue of his stance on the minimum wage and the Fight for 15, here he is, Andy Puzder, on Fox Business News in 2015.
If your concern is to create entry-level jobs for young Americans, then a $15 minimum wage is something you should be protesting against. And this, Dr. Carson brought this up. Labor participation for minority youth is really very low. My friend Art Laffer and I had an article in Investors Business Daily on that about a year and a half ago. But even if you look at labor participation for 16 to 19-year-olds for every race, the reality is that we've hit 4 historic lows this year, and that goes back to when the Bureau of Labor Statistics started recording the data in 1948. So fewer young people are working or looking for work than's been the case since 1948. 1948. If your objective is to bolster and support the unions, and you're not all that concerned about whether young people will have entry-level jobs, then you should be protesting in favor of a $15 minimum wage. And I think most people are concerned about young people in this country, and fewer people are concerned about big labor.
That was Andy Puzder on Fox Business in 2015. Last year, in an interview with a Business Insider, Labor Secretary nominee Puzder sang the praises of restaurant automation. He said he's quoted as saying that machines are, quote, always polite, they always upsell, they never take a vacation, they never show up late, there's never a slip and fall or an age, sex, or race discrimination case. In other words, robots are completely docile workers as far as he's concerned.
Exploitable. I mean, the fact that, you know, when we did this survey, we did it over the holidays, the busiest time for restaurant workers, and 900 workers from his company reached out to us. It was overwhelming over a 2-week period. 564 filled out these surveys, and 2/3 of a mostly female workforce said they experienced very scary, pretty horrific sexual harassment. You've heard about the ads at Carl's Jr. with nearly naked women. And young women reported in our survey being asked by customers, why aren't you dressed like the women in the ads? I'll take you anyway. And then following them out into the parking lots, grabbing them, touching them, and workers complaining about these things and management doing nothing at all. So yes, if you want a robot who's willing to be touched and not complain about it, you know, I suppose that's the direction you want to go. But clearly, he hasn't done that. He hasn't automated his restaurants. He still has tens of thousands of workers in his restaurants, and they are obviously really suffering, or they wouldn't have reached out to us in the way that they did.
What about this argument that with a lower minimum wage, you have a greater workforce participation rate in the country?
Yeah, what's amazing about that is that our industry right now is actually going through the worst labor shortage in the history of our industry in every major metropolitan area, even as wages are going up. The plurality of his restaurants are in California, where wages are going up to 15, and we are experiencing in California the worst labor shortage in the history of the United States in the restaurant industry. And so, you know, the contrary is true. Jobs continue to grow in this industry at ever increasing rates, even as wages are going up.